She was only 3 years old when the world disappeared. It started with headaches. Small ones at first, the kind her mother thought came from too much television or not enough sleep. But then the headaches grew worse. Little Amara would cry in the middle of the night, pressing her tiny hands against her eyes, screaming that everything was too bright. Her parents rushed her to one hospital, then another, then another. Doctors ran tests. They whispered in hallways. They looked at charts and shook their heads. And finally, one afternoon in a cold examination room, a specialist sat down with her parents and said the words that would change everything. It was a rare genetic condition. There was no cure. Within 6 months, their daughter would lose her sight completely. Her mother collapsed into tears right there in the office. Her father just sat frozen, staring at the wall like he had forgotten how to breathe. And little Amara, too young to understand what any of it meant, just kept asking why everyone was so sad. By the time she turned 4, the world had become nothing but shadows and shapes. By 5, even the shadows were gone. All she had left were sounds, smells, and the feeling of things beneath her fingertips. Growing up blind in a small town was harder than anyone could imagine. Not because of the darkness itself. Amara got used to the darkness. She learned to navigate her home by counting steps. She memorized the layout of every room. She could tell what time of day it was just by listening to the birds outside. Her window or feeling how warm the sunlight was on her skin. No. The hardest part was the people. Kids at school didn't know how to act around her. Some avoided her completely, like blindness was something they could catch if they got too close. Others were crueler. They would move her chair when she wasn't paying attention just to watch her fall. They would whisper and laugh behind her back, knowing she could hear every word, but couldn't see their faces. One boy used to call her Ghost Girl because of the way she walked slowly with her hands slightly out in front of her. Another girl once told her she was lucky she couldn't see herself because she probably looked as weird as she acted. Amara never told her parents about any of it. She didn't want to add to their worry. She could hear the sadness in their voices every single day. The way her mother's breath would catch when she watched Amara struggle to find her shoes. The way her father would go quiet at dinner whenever someone mentioned something visual, like a sunset or a movie or the color of the flowers in the garden. They tried so hard to give her a normal life. They bought her audiobooks and special learning tools. They enrolled her in programs for visually impaired children. They told her over and over again that she was special, that she was brave, that she could do anything she set her mind to. But late at night, when she was supposed to be asleep, Amara would hear her mother crying in the kitchen, and she would hear her father saying things like, "What kind of life will she have? And how will she survive in this world?" Those words stayed with her. They buried themselves somewhere deep in her chest, right next to the loneliness and the shame. By the time she was 8 years old, Amara had learned to make herself small. She spoke quietly. She kept to herself. She stopped asking to play with other children because she already knew what the answer would be. She became invisible, which was almost funny when she thought about it. A blind girl that nobody could see. And then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Her grandmother had passed away a year earlier, leaving behind a small upright piano that nobody in the family knew how to play. It sat in the corner of the living room collecting dust, more of a piece of furniture than an instrument. Amara had walked past it 100 times without giving it much thought. But on that particular day, something made her stop. Maybe it was the sound of the rain against the window. Maybe it was the heaviness in her chest that she didn't know how to name. Whatever it was, she found herself reaching out and touching the wooden surface of the piano. It was cool and smooth beneath her fingers. She slid her hand along the edge until she found the keys. She pressed one down. A single note filled the room. something inside her woke up. It was like a door had opened in a part of her mind she never knew existed. She pressed another key, then another. The sounds were random at first, just noise without meaning. But even the noise felt like something. It felt like speaking, like breathing. From that day on, the piano became her world. Every day after school, while her parents were busy with work, Amara would sit at that old piano and teach herself to play. She had no teacher. She had no sheet music she could read. She had nothing but her ears and her fingers, and an endless hunger to create something beautiful. She would listen to songs on the radio and then try to figure out the notes by memory. She would make mistakes, hundreds of them, thousands of them. But she never stopped, because every time her fingers found the right combination, every time a melody came together the way it was supposed to, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt powerful. Music didn't care that she was blind. Music didn't whisper behind her back or move her chair to make her fall. Music didn't look at her with pity or avoid her in the hallways. Music just was. And when she played, she wasn't the ghost girl anymore. She wasn't the poor blind child that everyone felt sorry for. She was just Amara, and Amara was enough. The years passed slowly. She got better and better at the piano, though she never told anyone about it. It was her secret, her private world. She would wait until her parents were asleep and then sneak downstairs in the dark, which wasn't dark to her anyway, and play for hours. Soft melodies that filled the empty spaces inside her. Complicated pieces that challenged her fingers and her mind. And eventually her own compositions. Songs that came from somewhere deep within her. Songs that told stories she didn't have the words to speak out loud. By the time she was 15, Amara had composed over 40 original pieces. Nobody had ever heard any of them. Nobody knew what she could do. She was still the quiet girl who sat alone at lunch. She was still the one people either pitied or ignored. She had accepted her place in the world. She was invisible, and maybe that was okay. Maybe some people were just meant to live in the shadows. But life has a strange way of pushing people into the light, whether they're ready for it or not. And Amara's moment was coming. She just didn't know it yet. Asterisk. 2 years passed, and Amara turned 17. On the outside, nothing much had changed. She still went to the same school. She still sat alone at lunch. She still walked the hallways with her white cane, while other students stepped around her like she was an obstacle in their path. To the world, she was the same quiet blind girl she had always been. But on the inside, something was different. The music had grown. What started as simple melodies played in secret had become something much bigger. Amara could feel it every time she sat down at the piano. The songs that came out of her now were deeper, more complex, more alive. They carried emotions she couldn't express any other. Way, joy, anger, loneliness, hope, everything she had ever felt poured out through her fingertips. And into the keys she had filled 3 notebooks with compositions written in Braille, her own personal language that nobody else could read. Over 60 original pieces now, each one a piece of her soul, but still, she kept it all hidden. The thought of sharing her music with anyone terrified her. What if they laughed? What if they told her it wasn't good enough? What if they looked at her with that same pity she had seen her whole life and said something like, "Oh, that's nice for someone like you"? No, it was safer to keep the music to herself. At least in her secret world, she was free. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. Amara was sitting in the kitchen doing homework, her fingers moving across her Braille textbook while the radio played softly in the background. Her mother liked to keep it on for company while she cooked. Usually, Amara tuned it out. But on this day, something made her stop and listen. A woman's voice was speaking excitedly about a national talent competition. It was one of those big televised shows where people from all over the country came to perform in front of judges and a live audience. Singers, dancers, musicians, all kinds of performers competing for a chance at their dreams. But it was the next part that made Amara's heart stop. The grand prize was a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious music conservatories in the country, a place where the best pianists in the world had trained, a place that could open doors Amara had never even allowed herself to imagine. She sat completely still, her homework forgotten. The woman on the radio kept talking about how applications were open to anyone, how they were looking for raw talent and original voices, how this could be the opportunity of a lifetime for someone with a gift. Someone with a gift, the words echoed in Amara's mind long after the radio had moved on to another topic. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling she couldn't see, her thoughts racing in 100 different directions. Could she really do it? Could she really put herself out there in front of the whole world? The idea was terrifying. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible. The thought of standing on a stage, of being watched and judged by thousands of people, made her feel sick to her stomach. But there was another feeling, too. A small voice somewhere deep inside her that whispered, what if not? What if this was her chance? What if all those years of playing alone in the dark had been leading to something? What if she was meant for more than sitting in the shadows? The next morning, Amara told her parents about the competition. The silence that followed was heavy. She could feel their worry filling the room like fog. Finally, her mother spoke. "Sweetheart, are you sure about this? You know how people can be. I just don't want you to get hurt." Her father agreed. The world isn't always kind, Amara, especially to people who are different. Maybe it's better to wait. Maybe there will be other opportunities. Amara understood their fear. She had lived with it her whole life. But something had changed inside her overnight. Maybe she was tired of waiting. Maybe she was tired of hiding. Maybe she just wanted to know, once and for all, if she was as good as she secretly believed she was. "I have to try," she said quietly. "If I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." Her parents didn't argue after that. They could hear something in her voice that they had never heard before. Determination, courage, fire that had been burning in secret for years and was finally ready to be seen. The application process was simple. All she had to do was submit a video of herself performing an original piece. Her father helped her set up a phone on a small stand in the living room, pointed at the old piano that had started everything. Amara sat down at the keys and took a deep breath. The house was quiet. Outside, she could hear birds singing and the distant sound of cars passing by. Normal sounds of a normal day. But nothing about this moment felt normal. She had chosen one of her newest compositions, a piece she had written just a few months earlier during a week when she had felt particularly alone. It was sad and beautiful and complicated, full of unexpected turns and moments of quiet tenderness. It was, she believed, the best thing she had ever created. Her fingers found their positions on the keys. She closed her eyes, though it made no difference. And then she began to play. For the next 4 minutes, Amara forgot about the camera. She forgot about the competition and the judges and the millions of people who might someday see this video. She forgot about every cruel word that had ever been spoken to her, every laugh behind her back, every moment she had felt less than human. There was only the music. And in the music, she was whole. When the last note faded into silence, she sat still for a long moment. Then her father's voice came from across the room, thick with emotion. "That was beautiful, sweetheart. That was really beautiful." They submitted the video that same night. And then came the hardest part. Waiting. Days turned into weeks. Amara tried to go about her normal life, but the competition was always in the back of her mind. She checked the mail obsessively. She jumped every time the phone rang. She told herself over and over, again not to get her hopes up, that thousands of people had probably applied, that the chances of being selected were almost zero. But hope is a stubborn thing. No matter how many times she tried to push it down, it kept rising back up. Then one afternoon, exactly 5 weeks after she had submitted her video, a letter arrived. Her mother read it out loud while Amara stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, her hands trembling at her sides. "Dear Amara," the letter began, "we are pleased to inform you that your audition video has been selected from over 12,000 submissions. You have been chosen as one of 20 finalists to perform live on our nationally televised program." Her mother's voice broke. She couldn't finish reading. She just pulled Amara into a hug and held her tight while tears streamed down both their faces. She had done it. Against all odds, against everything the world had told her she could and couldn't be, she had done it. But as the reality set in over the following days, so did the fear. This was really happening. She was going to stand on a stage in front of millions of people. Judges would be watching her every move. Cameras would capture every expression on her face. And everyone, absolutely everyone, would see that she was blind. The voice in her head that had whispered, "What if?" was now screaming something else entirely. What have you done? There was no turning back now. In just 3 weeks, Amara would walk onto that stage. And whatever happened next would change her life forever. The day arrived faster than Amara was ready for. She barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind would race with terrible possibilities. What if she tripped on stage? What if her fingers froze up and she forgot how to play? What if she made a fool of herself in front of the entire country? By the time morning came, she felt like she hadn't rested at all. Her mother helped her get dressed in a simple blue dress they had picked out together. Nothing fancy. Amara didn't care about looking glamorous. She just wanted to feel like herself. The car ride to the city took almost 4 hours. Her father drove while her mother sat in the back with Amara, holding her hand the whole way. Nobody talked much. The silence was filled with nervous energy, the kind that makes your stomach tight and your palms sweaty. When they finally arrived at the venue, Amara could hear it before they even parked the car. Crowds of people, voices overlapping, music playing from somewhere inside, the sounds of excitement and anticipation filling the air like electricity. Her father helped her out of the car, and a production assistant met them at the entrance. The assistant spoke quickly, explaining where they needed to go and what would happen next. Amara tried to follow along, but her head was spinning. Everything felt too fast, too loud, too overwhelming. Backstage was chaos. Amara could hear other contestants warming up, a singer running through scales, a violin playing something classical, someone tapping out a rhythm on what sounded like a wooden floor. Everyone preparing, everyone nervous, everyone wanting this just as badly as she did. A makeup artist sat her down and did something to her face. Powder and brushes and things Amara couldn't see and didn't really care about. All she could think about was the piano waiting for her somewhere out there on that stage. The hours crawled by. One by one, the other contestants were called to perform. Amara listened to the muffled sounds of applause through the walls. Some performances got huge reactions. Others were met with polite clapping that faded quickly. She tried not to think about which category she would fall into. Finally, a voice called her name. Amara stood up so fast she almost knocked over her chair. Her mother squeezed her hand one last time and whispered something in her ear. "You've got this, sweetheart. Show them who you are." A stagehand took her arm and guided her through a maze of hallways. The sounds around her changed as they got closer to the stage. The muffled noise became clearer. She could hear the audience now. Thousands of people sitting in rows, waiting to be entertained, waiting to judge. They stopped at the edge of the stage. The stagehand told her to wait for her cue. Through a gap in the curtain, Amara could feel the heat of the stage lights. She could hear the host finishing up his introduction of the previous act. The crowd was clapping. Any second now, it would be her turn. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Then the host's voice boomed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, our next performer is 17-year-old Amara, a self-taught pianist who will be performing an original composition tonight. The stagehand gently touched her elbow. That's your cue, he said. Amara unfolded her white cane and stepped forward. The moment she appeared from behind the curtain, everything changed. The applause that had started out of politeness began to fade. She could feel the shift in the room. The energy went from excitement to something else. Confusion, curiosity, and underneath it all, something that felt a lot like doubt. She walked slowly, carefully, her cane tapping against the floor in front of her. The stage was bigger than she had imagined. The distance from the curtain to the piano felt like a mile. Every step she took echoed through the silent auditorium. And then she heard it. Whispers, soft at first, like wind through leaves, but growing louder. Is she blind? Oh my God, she can't see. How is she going to play? Amara kept walking. She had expected this. She had prepared herself for it. But hearing it out loud, feeling the judgment roll off the audience in waves, was harder than she had imagined. Then came the laughter. It started somewhere in the front rows. A group of teenagers, she guessed from the sound of their voices. One of them made a comment she couldn't quite hear, and the others burst out laughing. Someone mimicked the way she was walking, tapping an imaginary cane on the ground. More laughter followed. Amara's face burned. Her legs felt weak. For a terrible moment, she thought about turning around and walking right back off that stage. Giving up, going home, returning to her quiet life where nobody watched her and nobody laughed at her and nobody expected anything from her at all. But then she thought about all those nights alone at the piano, all those hours teaching herself to play in the darkness, all those compositions that had come from the deepest parts of her soul. She thought about the little girl who had lost her sight at 3 years old and had spent the next 14 years being told what she couldn't do. No, she wasn't going to. Run. She reached the piano and felt her way around to the bench. The audience had gone mostly quiet now, though she could still hear scattered whispers and a few more snickers from the front. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. The host's voice came through the speakers again. Whenever you're ready, Amara. She didn't respond. She just sat there for a moment, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. The piano was different from hers at home. Bigger. The keys felt smoother, more expensive. But it didn't matter. A piano was a piano, and music was music. She could feel the judges watching her. 3 of them, sitting at a long table somewhere to her left. She had heard them commenting on other performances throughout the night. One of them had a sharp voice and seemed hard to impress. Another was kinder, more encouraging. The third hadn't said much at all. Right now, all 3 were probably wondering the same thing as everyone else. Can she actually play? Or is this going to be a disaster? The doubt in the room was so thick Amara could almost taste it. It pressed against her from all sides, trying to crush her confidence, trying to make her small again. But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say. The woman who had left her the piano in the first place. The woman who had always believed in her, even when no one else did. The world will try to put you in a box. Her grandmother had told her once. They'll tell you what you are and what you're not. But you don't have to listen. You get to decide who you become. Amara took a deep breath. The whispers faded into the background. The laughter became distant, unimportant. The whole world shrank down to just her and the piano and the song that had been living inside her for 17 years. She thought about every moment of pain, every cruel word, every lonely night, every time someone had looked at her and seen nothing but a blind girl who would never amount to anything. And then she thought about the music, the one thing that had never let her down, the one place where she had always been enough. Her fingers pressed down on the keys, and she began to play. The first note was soft, almost a whisper. It floated into the silence of the auditorium like a single drop of rain falling into a still pond. Simple, gentle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But then came the second note, and the third, and suddenly the drops became a stream. Amara's fingers moved across the keys like they had done 1,000 times before in the darkness of her living room. But this was different. This wasn't practice. This wasn't hiding. This was real. And somewhere deep inside her, a door that had been locked for 17 years finally swung open. The music poured out of her. It started slow and melancholy, a haunting melody that seemed to hang in the air like mist. The notes told a story without words, a story of loneliness, of being different, of waking up every day in a world that refused to see you as anything more than your limitations. The teenagers in the front row, who had been laughing just moments ago, fell silent. One of them leaned forward in his seat, his smirk fading into something else entirely. Confusion, then curiosity, then something close to wonder. Amara didn't notice. She was somewhere else now, lost in the music, lost in the memories that flowed through her fingers and into the piano. She thought about being 5 years old and hearing her classmates whisper about her behind her back. The melody grew darker, heavier. She thought about the boy who called her Ghost Girl and the way that name had followed her for years. The notes became sharp, almost angry. But then something shifted. The music began to change. The heaviness lifted, note by note, like clouds parting after a storm. A new melody emerged from beneath the sadness. Something brighter, something stronger, something that sounded like hope fighting its way through the darkness. This was the part of the composition that Amara loved most. The part where the story turned, where the girl who had been beaten down by the world finally found something to hold on to, where she discovered that the very thing that made her different was also the thing that made her powerful. Her fingers danced faster now. The music swelled and grew, filling every corner of the auditorium. It climbed higher and higher, building towards something beautiful and inevitable. In the audience, people had stopped whispering. They had stopped shifting in their seats. They had stopped checking their phones and looking at the clock. Every single person in that room was watching the blind girl at the piano, and not one of them could look away. One of the judges, the woman with the kind voice, pressed her hand to her chest. Her eyes were wet. She had heard thousands of performances over the years. She had sat through countless auditions and competitions and showcases. But she had never heard anything quite like this. The music wasn't just technically impressive. It was alive. It told a story that words could never capture. It reached into her chest and grabbed hold of something she had forgotten was there. She wasn't alone. All around the auditorium, people were having the same experience. A father in the back row thought about his own daughter and the struggles she faced at school. A young man near the aisle remembered the grandmother he had lost last year and the lullabies she used to sing. A woman sitting alone wiped tears from her cheeks without even realizing she was crying. The music did that. It found the broken places inside people and touched them gently, like a friend who understood. Amara played on, unaware of the impact she was having. Her whole world had shrunk down to the piano beneath her fingers. The melody she had created in solitude was now breathing and growing in ways she had never imagined. It was like the music had a life of its own, and she was just the vessel carrying it into the world. The final movement began. The melody that had been building for nearly 4 minutes reached its peak. Amara's hands moved with impossible speed and precision, every note exactly where it needed to be. The sound filled the auditorium like a wave, crashing over the audience and pulling them under. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't possibly grow any bigger, it began to soften. The notes became gentle again, tender. The storm was passing. The sun was breaking through. The last few measures were simple, almost childlike. A return to the beginning, but different now, wiser, stronger. The same girl who had started the piece in darkness was ending it in light. Amara pressed the final key. The note hung in the air for a long, perfect moment. Then silence. Complete. Absolute silence. Amara sat frozen at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. She couldn't hear anything. No applause. No whispers. Nothing. For one horrible second, she thought she had failed. She thought the audience was sitting there in awkward silence, embarrassed for her, waiting for the whole thing to be over. Then someone stood up. She heard the sound of a single person rising from their seat. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. And then came the sound she would remember for the rest of her life. Applause. Not polite applause. Not scattered clapping. This was something else entirely. This was thunder. This was a roar. This was thousands of people expressing an emotion that had no words. An emotion that could only be released through the pounding of their hands together. Amara sat at the piano in shock. She could feel the vibration of the applause in her chest. She could hear people cheering, shouting, whistling. Someone in the crowd yelled out her name. The standing ovation went on and on. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. People didn't want to stop. They didn't want the moment to end. They wanted to stay in this feeling forever. At the judge's table, the woman with kind eyes was openly weeping. The man with the sharp voice, who never seemed impressed, was shaking his head slowly, a look of disbelief on his face. The third judge, the quiet one, had risen from his seat and was applauding with his hands above his head. Backstage, Amara's parents were holding each other and crying. Her mother had her face buried in her father's shoulder. Her father was staring at the monitor that showed the stage, watching his daughter sitting at that piano, surrounded by the sound of people who finally understood what she was capable of. The host eventually walked back onto the stage. He had to hold up his hands to quiet the crowd, and even then, it took nearly a minute before people settled down enough for him to speak. He walked over to Amara and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That," he said into the microphone, his voice still thick with emotion, "that was absolutely extraordinary." The crowd erupted again. More applause. More cheering. Someone threw flowers onto the stage. Amara stood up slowly, her legs shaky. She didn't know what to do. She had never experienced anything like this in her life. For 17 years, she had been invisible. For 17 years, she had been pitied and mocked and overlooked. And now thousands of people were on their feet, applauding her like she was the most important person in the world. She lifted her hand in a small wave, unsure of what else to do. The crowd cheered even louder. She could feel tears running down her face, but she wasn't sad. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't sad at all. As the stagehand guided her off the stage and back into the wings, Amara could still hear the applause echoing behind her. It followed her down the hallway. It stayed with her as her parents wrapped her in their arms. It rang in her ears long after the show had ended and she was sitting in the quiet of her hotel room. The world had laughed at her when she walked onto that stage, but she had made them listen, and nothing would ever be the same again. Amara didn't sleep that night. She lay in the hotel bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Cars passing, people talking on the street below, the distant hum of a world that had no idea how much her life had just changed. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since she left the stage. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Relatives she barely knew. Teachers who had once looked at her with pity. Everyone wanted to reach out. Everyone wanted to be part of her story now, but Amara wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. She needed time to process what had happened. Time to understand that the moment she had dreamed about for so long had actually come true. The next morning, the results were announced. All 20 finalists gathered backstage while the host read the names in reverse order. 20th place, 19th, 18th. Amara stood quietly with her parents on either side of her, their hands gripping hers so tightly it almost hurt. The names kept coming. 15th, 10th, 5th. Amara's name hadn't been called. Her mother was trembling. Her father had stopped breathing. 3rd place went to a singer from the southern coast. 2nd place went to a violin duo who had performed a breathtaking classical piece. The crowd applauded politely, but there was tension in the air. Everyone knew whose name was coming next. The host paused for dramatic effect. The auditorium fell completely silent. And our grand prize winner, he announced, the recipient of the full scholarship to the National Conservatory of Music, is Amara. The crowd exploded. Amara felt her mother collapse against her, sobbing with joy. Her father wrapped his arms around both of them and held on like he would never let go. All around them, people were cheering and clapping and crying. She had done it. The blind girl from the small town who had taught herself to play on a dusty old piano had just won a national competition. She was going to music school. She was going to have a future she had never dared to imagine. But that was only the beginning. Within hours of the broadcast, the video of her performance was uploaded to the internet. By the next morning, it had been viewed over 2 million times. By the end of the week, that number had grown to 50 million. People all over the world watched the clip of Amara walking onto that stage with her white cane. They heard the whispers of the crowd. They saw the teenagers in the front row laughing at her. And then they watched as she sat down at the piano and silenced every single one of them. The video became a phenomenon. News outlets picked up the story. Talk shows invited her to appear. Magazines wanted to feature her on their covers. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the blind girl who had shocked the world. But it wasn't the fame that meant the most to Amara. It was the messages. They came from everywhere. Thousands of emails and letters and social media comments from people she had never met. People who had watched her performance and felt something shift inside them. A 12-year-old boy from another country wrote to tell her that he had been born without his left hand. Kids at school made fun of him every day, and he had started to believe that he would never amount to anything. But after watching her video, he had decided to try out for his school's basketball team. He didn't make it the first time, but he was going to keep trying. A woman in her 50s wrote to say that she had given up on her dream of becoming a painter after a car accident left her partially paralyzed. She had spent the last 10 years feeling sorry for herself. But something about watching Amara play had woken her up. She had ordered new art supplies that very day. A teenage girl wrote to share that she had been struggling with depression and had started to feel like there was no point in going on. But watching Amara face that crowd, hearing the music that came out of her despite everything she had been through, had given her a reason to hold on. She was getting help now. She was going to be okay. Story after story. Life after life. People who had been ready to give up finding the strength to keep going because of a 17-year-old girl and her piano. Amara read every single message. Some of them made her cry. Some of them made her laugh. All of them reminded her that music was never just about the notes. It was about connection. It was about showing people that they weren't alone in their struggles. The years that followed were a whirlwind. Amara attended the conservatory on her full scholarship and graduated at the top of her class. She released her first album of original compositions, which went on to win multiple awards. She performed in concert halls around the world, from Paris to Tokyo to New York City, but she never forgot where she came from. Every year, she returned to her small hometown to hold a free concert for the community. She started a foundation to provide music education to children with disabilities. She spoke at schools and events about the importance of believing in yourself, even when no one else does. And whenever she sat down at the piano, no matter how big the stage or how famous the audience, she always thought about that little girl who had first touched the keys on a rainy afternoon. The girl who had been told she would never see again. The girl who had found a way to see through sound. One night, years after that life-changing competition, a journalist asked her a question during an interview. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, the one who was mocked and bullied and made to feel invisible, what would you say to her? Amara thought about it for a long moment. She thought about all the pain she had endured, all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, all the times she had wondered if she would ever be anything more than the blind girl that people pitied. Then she smiled. I would tell her to keep playing, she said. I would tell her that the people who laugh at you today will be the same people cheering for you tomorrow. And I would tell her that her differences aren't her weakness. They're her power. The world just hasn't figured that out yet. The journalist nodded, clearly moved by her answer. But Amara wasn't finished. And I would tell her one more thing, she added, her voice soft but strong. I would tell her that one day she's going to walk onto a stage in front of thousands of people. They're going to look at her and see all the things she can't do. They're going to whisper and laugh and doubt her. But then she's going to sit down at that piano, and she's going to show them something they'll never forget. She paused, and when she spoke again, her words carried the weight of everything she had been through. She's going to show them that the girl they couldn't see was worth seeing all along. Today, Amara continues to perform and inspire millions around the world. Her story has been translated into dozens of languages. Her music is played in homes and concert halls on every continent. But if you ask her what her greatest accomplishment is, she won't mention the awards or the albums or the sold-out shows. She'll tell you about the messages, the letters from strangers who found hope in her story, the young people who decided to chase their dreams because of something she showed them, because in the end, that's what it was always about. Not proving the doubters wrong. Not winning competitions. Not becoming famous. It was about making sure that the next little girl who loses her sight, or the next little boy who is born different, knows that they are not alone, that they are not broken, that they have something inside them that the world desperately needs to hear. All they have to do is find the courage to share it. And that is the true story of the blind girl who made the world listen.